So Dr. Formica was telling us about this interim period with the OPTN and the leadership role that you were taking on. Can you tell us a little bit about how that worked with the multiple contractor environment and kind of explain?
Absolutely. So my role as the executive director, the interim executive director, was meant to be a bridge builder. There were all these different contractors that provided expertise, and there was no way to share that information with the committees, with the board of directors, and the executive director was meant to really be the bridge builder between these contractors and share the information so that the board will have the necessary insight to make decisions.
And so how did that work out?
It didn't work out according to plan. I will say that the multi-vendor contractors didn't have visibility into what the other contractors were doing. And for my own role, initially I did have an opportunity to meet with the different contractors, but as far as sharing information, that was halted because the government had a different idea of how they wanted to move that forward with managing the multi-vendor contractor environment, which led to the board of directors not having visibility into what was going on with this modernization effort.
Yeah, so this is, I'm glad she brought that up because I don't think you gave yourself credit for the enormity of the task you were assigned because, again, it goes back to historically what we used to do, right? So when the contract was awarded to the contractor and the contractor became the OPTN, not because it had to be, but the way we ran things, the CEO and executive director of the contractor was also the executive director of the OPTN, which on the one hand, I can understand the perceived conflicts of interest. I'm aware of that perception, but there was a reality to that, which was that person had total visibility and authority over the moving parts that was creating the OPTN's work products, like its policies, like its response to emergencies, like its oversight of transplant programs. And so you had one person who actually had visibility into the whole workings of the OPTN that could then facilitate the board and the committees to get their work done, right? When you bring in somebody from the outside who doesn't have that sort of oversight authority, and it's your lived experience, I think that creates real challenges. And then if you're hamstrung by not being allowed or given the authority or not being allowed to have the conversations you need to have, well, then we're not going to achieve what we need to achieve. And I think that's what we experienced. Even though we got a lot done, actually, if you actually look at this year, it was a productive year. But it's only because of hard work and effort of people.
So this leadership role, this executive function of the executive director of the OPTN, who makes the decision who that should be?
Well, so that's specified in the final rule, right? So the final rule states that the board of directors shall select the executive director of the OPTN.
So it's not a government employee, it's who...
No. An independent executive director. So exactly to Dr. Formica's point, the board has final say based off of the final regulation.
But this is what the community needs to know. This is these unintended consequences of these ideas, right? So in the past, we'd select the executive director worked for the contractor would pay that person's salary, give them their HR, et cetera. When I was president of the OPTN last year, I didn't have a checkbook. But Rexanah can't work for free because she's got a family, right? So how am I going to pay her? How am I going to give her HR benefits? Who's going to buy her cell phone? Yeah, I mean, it's all this sort of stuff that we had to sort of work out on the fly and figure out how that got done, right? And frankly, it just recreates, with one exception of a creative way you can do like a lend-lease and have an employee that's your employee but paid for by another contractor. It basically recreated the same problem that we were trying to get away from. And I don't know if you experienced that about...
Yes. So to be very candid, it was interesting to go through the hiring process. The whole point was to have someone separate and an independent part from the legacy contractor, but being hired through a different contractor, some of the same issues you'd imagine would come up. But more importantly, because of the role that I had, having visibility into something as basic as finances took more time than it should have because the board didn't have direct insight. And neither did I. There was a lot of having to build the relationships, build the trust to get the information so that the board can make important decisions.
And many times, 5 or 6 times, whatever that was, I can specifically had to speak to the board support contractor and reiterate that Rexanah does not work for the board support contractor. Rexanah works for the OPTN, the board support contracts are providing HR services for us, right? I mean, that was an important distinction, and I'm not quite sure everybody actually bought into that or held to the spirit of that. But the irony of that is that's the spirit of what Congress intended it to do. And at the end of the day, it was the OPTN trying to do what Congress wanted us to do more than everybody else. And I thought that was kind of an interesting twist on this story.
Well, thank you both for your leadership. I mean, it's been a lot. What do you think the future holds for the role of the executive director of the OPTN? What should it be?
I'm going to add on to what Dr. Formica mentioned earlier on, which is this board now needs to remember its rights, its responsibilities, and its power. This is an independent decision-making board. They have the authority to steer the ship of how OPTN gets operated, not any other entity. The government, HHS, has oversight authority, but the board is responsible for the decision-making authority, especially because their fiduciary responsibilities tied to serving as a board of director member.
And you're an attorney, right? So your background's in advocacy and understanding those things. What type of experience and credentials do you think is important in someone who's going to take on a role like this?
So someone who understands how to read statute, the final rule, someone who knows how to read a financial statement, someone who knows how to get trust from the community. The OPTN cannot move separate and apart from the community that is volunteering its time to pour into the work. And someone who doesn't have ulterior motives to the work of OPTN.
And what are the motives of the OPTN? What is the mission of the OPTN at its heart to you?
To save lives, to ensure that more people can get the gift of life through transplantation.
And we did how many transplants in the United States last year?
Over 41,000, right?
Yeah, over 48,000.
Over 41,000
Yes.
kidney transplants.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. I'm a kidney person, so that's kidney-centric. But yeah, so it's pretty remarkable. And I think the other thing that the executive director has to do is realize their fiduciary role is to the OPTN, right? And that can be, I think that poses challenges in this environment, because on the one hand, it means that person might have to be in a contradictory role to, or a contradictory position to the contractor, perhaps in a contradictory position to HRSA. And that person's going to have to navigate that, realizing that even though you can be on a different side of an argument, it doesn't mean you stop being effective and you try to get things done that's in the best interest of the patients who we serve, right? And you know, in the past, there were some very talented people that I thought worked within HRSA who totally got that and understood the role, which is not to always agree. You're not supposed to always agree in this position. It's supposed to be a dynamic discussion that goes back and forth.
There's fruitfulness in diversity of thought when it gets to the point of having solutions that actually work in reality and not just conceptually.
Is there anything else you guys want to add to tell the community about your experiences working in the United States and the national transplant system here?
Your thoughts are probably better than mine, because but seriously, because you came in from the outside,
Yeah.
You were immersed in it, you got to observe it, versus somebody like myself who's just sort of moved along through it, and my views are always colored by the past experiences.
So I will say, even with the challenges and the limitations that exist, the United States system of organ transplantation is still remarkable. We can still be this exemplar model of what can be done when different institutions and entities come together to do good things. Not that there is this sadness or negativity around, but really there is light and power when you can get more people to have organs transplanted and have more people invested and bought into this incredible system.
Well said, well said.
I could not add anything else.
Fantastic. All right, well, thank you both for being here. I appreciate your time and attention and the leadership that you both have displayed over the course of your tenure with the OPTN.
Thank you.
Thank you.